At Mad Snacks, they believe in the simple pleasure of healthy snacking, and their mantra is clear.
Be happy.
Eat mad.
Today's show is brought to you by Mad Snacks. They aim to transform your hunger into happiness by offering you the highest quality, most delicious, high-protein spreads. From fun, bold flavors to wholesome goodness, their spreads are crafted to bring a smile to your face with every delicious bite. Join the madness today because happiness and snacks go hand in hand.
For our listeners, use Hero20 at checkout to receive 20% off your order.
Be happy.
Eat mad.
At madsnx.com.
Hello! Welcome back to another episode of Everyday Heroes Podcast. Today, the boys are interviewing Derek Shoemaker. We're going to talk about his military career, his journey through law school, his time as a litigator, and ultimately being elected the county councilman for Kershaw County. And if you found this episode enjoyable, please make sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell for new episodes. So sit back and relax while we yap.
The views and opinions of this podcast are solely based off the hosts and guests and are not associated with any agency, corporation, or LLC. Enjoy the show. I feel a beat coming on. Hit it, boys!
Mike's got the facts with a stern face. Cliff's cracking jokes just to keep the pace. Together they tackle the big and the small.
Everyday heroes standing tall. What's up, dude?
What's going on, my friend? Happy weekend.
Dude, you know, it's the time of year where you don't want to go to work. I'm going to say it. You just don't want to go. Like, everybody's having a good time.
I didn't think that was a time of year. I thought that was like every day I want to go to work. I think there was a time of year for it.
No, man, you know, like, everybody's kind of taking leave. So if you go to work, you can't. Like, let's be honest, you can't get anything done at work because everybody's off.
Everybody's out this time of year.
Everybody's always saying just wait till the new year to get it started. And then, you know, it's like, so what's the point?
Well, the point, just as long as they keep paying me, I don't care. I don't care who's there. I'll be there.
Christmas shopping done? Are we done?
I am almost done. Amazon's the way to go. I do everything on Amazon. I need to get out to some of these local businesses. I'm sure our guests will get on my butt about that, but we'll get there when we get there, I guess.
Well, speaking of guests today, we have Derek Shoemaker with us. He's the county councilman for seat 3 for Kershaw County, correct?
Yes.
And please say hi to everybody, Derek.
Hey, everyone. How are you?
And, of course, joining us, we have James coming from Arizona, making sure our facts are right as we're talking, trying to keep us out of trouble, which is a full-time job. Say hey, James.
Hello, everyone. How's it going, guys?
Good, James. Tell us about the weekend. What'd you do?
Oh, gosh. Football.
Derek, we're really excited to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I know that a lot of people don't see, you know, they can speculate all they want and they can come to conclusions. They really don't understand the complex intricacies of like government and stuff that goes on up top.
Sure.
But before we get talking to that, I kind of want to tell your story about how we got there. So I know that you joined the military. Can you walk us through, like, when did you start and then what branch did you pick and was there a reason behind it? And let's kind of take it from there.
Yeah, sure. So I joined the Marines in 97 and, you know, I did not come from a military family. So my grandfather was in World War II, but I think just about everybody's grandfather our age was in World War II, some capacity. So other than that, no military people in the family, but I was a newspaper editor at the high school and was really involved kind of academically, but, you know, didn't do a lot of sports. I was the mascot over at Lugo Felton High School. So I wore, it was a very, very, very poorly made, not poorly made, but just made with poor material, demon suit with like a mask from Walmart. But yeah, danced around and, you know, did all that. That was a lot of fun, but I didn't do a lot of athletic stuff. And so I had this recruiter call me. He'd called me a couple times, and Sergeant Cy Calais, he retired out of here in Columbia. And I remember he called and just, you know, called on the phone and just asked me, he said, hey, you know, just going to call you one more time and just wanted to let you know that I think you probably won't do okay in the Marines. I don't know if you'll do well or not. It was total reverse psychology, and I knew it was, but it still worked.
I was about to say, why would you say that?
Yeah, I mean, it was because he was a good recruiter. He kind of knew, you know, he knew that it would work. And the crazy thing is I knew what he was doing, but it still worked.
Yeah.
Because he said, you know, I don't know if you'll do that well, but I think that you've really never challenged yourself. And I suspect you've taken paths in life that were not challenging, but you're lucky enough that the things you're kind of good at are things people praise. So your parents probably think you're great because you make good grades and all that stuff, but you've never really challenged yourself. And I think the Marine Corps would be a challenge. And for the first time in your life, you might do something that you could totally fail at. And boy, that stuck with me, so I just kept thinking about it. And finally I went and I said, again, he was fundamentally correct. And so I joined the Marines, and, there was moments during the delayed entry program where I was like, I don't want to, I even went and talked to an Air Force recruiter at one point about seeing if there was a way I could get out of it. And a lot of that was just fear, terrified of it. But boy, when I got, and I remember getting to Parris Island. What's interesting, are you guys from South Carolina?
I'm a transplant.
I'm a transplant.
Okay, so what's weird about joining the Marines in South Carolina is obviously it's Parris Island, is the whole thing about going on the bus and everything, that happens, but if you're from South Carolina, it happens at 10 a.m. on a van. And they get you there, and you get your head on a desk for 13 hours till everyone else comes from the airport. So they literally, I'm on this little van with the other kids from South Carolina because they met us at Fort Jackson, and then they picked us up in the morning, this little van to Parris Island. We do the yellow footprints, but it's a different feel at 10 in the morning with like 4 other guys. Yeah. And then they take you in a classroom and put your head on the desk. And as weird as it sounds, when I think back about boot camp, one of the most difficult things was that 12 or 13 hours sitting in that it's the waiting. Everybody, just sitting
start yelling at me.
Yeah, and that's when I learned that it's the waiting that kills you. Yep. Just tell me what I'm going to do. And so I just remember laying on my head on the desk thinking this was a horrible mistake. Yep. Psych-Calais is awful. And, but obviously like everybody, you graduate and you realize, okay, I've earned something.
Yep.
And so that for me was really it. I mean, pushing myself, and really, I think from that point forward in life, I think it's so important. I tell my kids this. My son's 18 and my daughter's 17, that it's so important to do something that makes you uncomfortable pretty regularly, right? And so, I mean, the Marine Corps for me was that for sure. So, yeah, that's kind of what brought me into it.
So I was just going to say, like, when I got to basic training, I was there I think we were there for like 5 weeks waiting for it to fill up, and all we did was KP every day. Every day was KP. And I'm an eater, so I didn't think that. I was like, well, at least they're feeding me. I get to eat before anybody else.
Yeah, no, I remember very well, I had the experience of, the guy coming on the bus and saying, you have 10 seconds to get off, 5 have already expired. And he wasn't even a drill sergeant. This is the difference between the Army. This is like just the guy doing the end processing. And then you get in there and you're like, that's not even a drill sergeant. It's some corporal,
right? Yelling
at you. Yeah. And then you see your first drill sergeant, and you're just like, just start yelling at me and let me get it over. And it's just that anticipation of, let's go. So I completely understand that, and I agree with you. Like I do the same thing. I tell my kids, get comfortable being uncomfortable. That's probably the strongest thing I can tell you, because that means that you're challenging yourself. If you're not good at anything, just don't be like, I'm not going to do it. Right. Go try it. And either one, you're going to like it and do it, or, you'd be like, at least I tried. I acknowledged it. Yeah.
Oh, I think, completely. And, it was funny because I joined. So one thing where I had something about the Marines that was kind of familiar to me is I had every intention of being infantry. I mean, that's what Marines are supposed to do. Yep. Every Marine's a rifleman for sure, but I wanted to be the MOS of infantry. And I was telling my recruiter, the same recruiter, that. And he's the one who told me, he asked me, well, do you want to be a cop? And do you want to stay in the Marines for? And this is the and you guys were during pre 9/11, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So you guys remember like the military pre 9/11, there's this whole like that whole super patriotic thing didn't exist pre 9/11, you know? So there was kind of a stigma, like, and so I remember him telling me, hey, if you're going to do 4 years and you're not sure you're going to do a career, unless you're going to be in law enforcement, infantry may not be the best decision because, people, you got to explain why you're not some killer and all this stuff. And so he's the one who even told me, I didn't know it existed, that there was a public affairs in the Marine Corps. Like every branch has a public affairs division. So I went and met with the public affairs guys and took a couple of tests. And so that was the job that they put me into. So they made me a Marine Corps journalist, which again, initially I did not even know was a thing, but it was the same recruiter that reverse psychologized me in. And he himself was a infantry guy. And so he was speaking from experience. And, again, it was a great job. And, obviously the world changed after 9/11, but I think you probably would have been right had the world not changed after 9/11.
So is this? I just got to ask: is this like the same job from Full Metal Jacket? Is that
Yeah,
the
it's
same?
in fact, if you go, so we go to the Defense Information School, and sort of ironically, they put the Defense Information School where they teach journalists for the military in Fort Meade, Maryland, which is the same place NSA is. It's kind of weird that you have the most secretive place and the most public disseminating job in the same base. And in fact, it actually would cause problems because when we'd go on assignments and stuff on the base, they would always tell you, don't go near the NSA building, stay away from NSA. And there's always some issue where some kid takes a camera by accident on NSA property. But yeah, so if you go into Defense Information School, DINFOS, I feel 30, 40, 50% of the time in the Marine barracks, that movie's going to be playing somewhere. Right. It's and especially the boot camp half. But yeah, I mean, so Joker, that was combat correspondent was the MOS.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, exact same thing that Joker did. And that movie is like, I mean, everybody loves Full Metal Jacket, but particularly if you're a military journalist, if you're a combat correspondent in the Marines, that movie is literally written about you.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
So you're like, sadly for me, so I was a medic. I don't like watching movies because every movie that has a medic, we always get killed.
yeah.
Every movie.
Yeah, there's not a lot of military journalist movies, but if you're only going to have a handful, that's definitely up there.
Yeah, and I gotta thank Matt Damon for his role in Courage Under Fire.
Yep.
Where I was a flight medic and they portrayed the flight medic as a cracked up.
Yeah. He lost
clinic worker.
Yeah, he barely looks like Matt Damon in the movie. He's 9 pounds.
They did a really good job of like making him look like a crackhead.
Yeah.
I know a couple medics, and I mean, the movie's not too far removed.
Watch it.
Yeah.
Be careful.
Crackhead,
But tell me what 12 Bravo movie they made.
hey, actually, 12 Bravo. We were in the. Didn't you hear him call for the engineers for the Bangalore? And
Okay, I'll give you that one.
yeah.
There you go.
Where's the Bangalore at?
Yeah, and James was an MP. Like he'll be like John Wick was after my career.
Yeah. You're that guy pulling people over for going 12 and 11.
Oh my God, they're
I'm
the
not
worst.
that guy, but I'm more like the Tom Cruise. The Tom Cruise guy that because he was an MP in the movie.
The Jack
So,
Reacher? Yeah.
Jack Reacher.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll claim that one.
There you go.
What's a good MP movie? Let's see.
I don't
get.
They're
What was John Travolta
Jack
was
Reacher.
one? No, John Travolta was one.
Oh, he was in the
General's Daughter. Base.
Yeah,
He's-
General's
yeah,
Daughter.
Yeah.
Yeah, good
Yeah.
That
movie.
was CID, but yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying that's probably as close. That's probably closer.
Yeah.
It's like the all the services at NCIS, they have the FBI, and in my later job, I did work with a lot of those guys, the federal agent side of the military.
Yeah, my dad was a CID agent his entire career.
Yeah.
So it's funny that, I actually I was an MP for 3 days. So I enlisted as an MP, and there was a incident that I didn't disclose. So when they did my background check, they said, hey, this is still popping, even though I was detained for something that showed up, but I was never charged nor, said that I was guilty of it. So I had to go back and sign whatever waiver that they needed. And by the time I did that, they said, hey, it's all full. What do you want to do next? And I was like, well, what do you got? And he's like, medic. And I was like, okay.
It's interesting. You were talking about being sort of trying to be uncomfortable. What was great about being a journalist is almost everywhere you went, the immediate opinion of you was, who is this? And not just, of course, always with the infantry, but you go to the air crew, it's like, who are you? Like you're some, you're popping in and out. So it was always the first hardest thing to do was always, how do you get these guys to like you? And especially I was only in for 4 years. So I left as a sergeant, but until for the first, 3.5 years, as a E1 to E3, E4, you go in and you're usually fairly junior. There might be especially E3 and below. So it's not like you have a high rank that they're going to respect. So you've got to kind of build this rapport. And so for me, what I would always do is my sort of like tagline to these guys is, look, like I would ask somebody. So if I get some guy who'd come particularly around my age and they'd be a real jerk, like, it must be nice to do this. I'd be, where are you from? And, I'm from Tempe, Arizona. Cool. What's your mom? What paper does your mom read? Well, what paper do you get at the house or whatever? I said, well, tell you what, when this is over, I'll make sure I get a good photo of you or a good story of you, and I'll personally send a copy to that paper in Tempe, Arizona, and they'll probably run it. 90% of the time that happened. And so I built a reputation among the unit I was with that, oh man, Shoemake, he'll get you in your, my mama sent me a copy of the paper. And so that was huge. And so that's what, rather than try to lean, the one thing that I think that journalists would do that would always fail is try to convince an infantryman or an artilleryman or an aircrew guy that, you're the same as them, because you're not. Like, the job you do is different. So I'm not going to try to out tough an infantry guy. I mean, I'm not going to go into an infantry barracks and say, I can understand the difficulty of this, or an air crew and say, I understand this, what you're doing. And so I just went and said, yeah, it's a great job, actually. It's really cool. It has its challenges, but yeah, I mean, it's nothing like what you guys do. So, let's talk about what you got. Tell me about it. And then, especially when you built the reputation of the guy that could get them in, their hometown paper, it was huge. And to the point that I'd have sometimes senior people calling, majors and lieutenant colonels and saying, hey, do something for me because I'm a mom. And so it was, keys to, if you'd play it right, you could have the keys to the kingdom.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Well, that's just people skills though, right? That's just
Yeah.
like, I always come from a place where, like, I'm going to ask you for something, but at the same time, I want to provide you something.
Yeah.
So it's
right.
not a team.
Everybody's got something that is of value to someone else.
Yep.
The question isn't, do you have it? It's how to find it and make that bridge, right?
Yep, exactly. So you said you did 4 years in, you departed as an E5, and then what was next after that? Well, hold on, there was one thing I want to talk about. So you were an AFN broadcaster in Kosovo, and I only remember this because before 9/11 kicked off, Bosnia, Kosovo, those were the big things.
Yeah, Kosovo Air War, which was in 99 to 2000. My memory is shaky on that, but 99, 2000, I believe. And so I got stationed in Tazar, Hungary, which is where they were flying the bombing missions out of. Mm-hmm. And so I was with an air unit initially, and then I went on the 26 Mu. And so I would go into Kosovo proper for assignments, but a lot of my stuff was done in Tazar, covering the air wing. And I would debrief the pilots and stuff when they got back. So my primary role was as a print journalist, writing the stories. But then at job school, they teach you print, broadcast, video, and audio. So I found out there was a station at Tazar. That's where they were broadcasting all the AFN stuff for the Balkans, was out of Tazar, Hungary. So when I found that out, I just walked in there and introduced myself. It was an army, a female army sergeant who was kind of doing most of the work. Introduced myself, say, I've got the MOS, I'm certified to do this. Is there anything you'd let me do? And so she made me do a radio test, and they had, it was great for her because it gave her some time, so she took some blocks of time that she was doing. So from Saturday from, I think it was noon to 3 or 9 to noon, but it was for a 3-hour block on Saturdays. I did a little all request radio call-in show on the AFN for the Balkans. And that was really neat. I also learned, as you guys probably have seen, that as funny as you think you are, as good as you think you are with people, once you do this and put a microphone in front of you, it's like your wit leaves, or at least for me it did. I'm in this little room by myself, and I'm like, I'm a funny guy. People like me. And then you're in the room, and you're just like, and you did the radio voice. I was like, hey, this is, like, why did I do that? So that was tough.
Can you give Cliff some pointers then?
Hold on. I was going to say something totally. I was going to say, I used to think Mike was funny until we started. I'm carrying this whole thing.
It was, I mean, especially by yourself. And, it was difficult. I enjoyed it, but, I have kind of a bit of my voice can be somewhat nasally, and everyone's self-conscious about their voice. And then, on video too, the same thing. And so it was a great experience. Again, going back to discomfort, I loved it. But print journalism was sort of where my kind of heart was. And then, that was a really cool experience.
What was the most oddest request you got?
Well, you're talking about on the radio?
Yeah.
Not that odd, because they...
Was it like, hey, me and the boys out here on the field are feeling a little froggy. Can you play It's Raining Men?
Listen,
back to back.
Well, look, I mean, I don't know how PC this is, and I don't know what the military was like after 2001 when I got out, but, everything in the military has some, it would be shock.
Go ahead.
It would be more shocking if dudes weren't asking for effeminate songs.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So that was common. But it was weird. I had a buddy of mine, Abshire, and Abshire had all these was a really opinionated dude. So we did this whole big rant on. It was around the McDonald's coffee spill time, and he did this whole big rant about, the McDonald's coffee case and everything, which was based on things any of us heard. There was no internet. We were all just basing on things people told us. So it was zero fact based. And he does this huge rant, and I did it, and I ran it. And that's when I learned that there's approval process and stuff. So that wasn't, it was a weird, but that wasn't necessarily a weird requirement. I just thought, yeah, I could do it. And I mean, I was already on leaving. I already had orders to leave. I think if I didn't, that would have been the end of my broadcast career. So
That's funny. So you also, so another movie kind of parallel. So like the Good Morning Vietnam.
yeah, I met that guy, the real guy, Adrian Cronauer.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So Robin Williams plays the character he plays, Adrian Cronauer. Obviously, the version he tells of what happened is far more subdued than what happened in that movie. But in Denfos, he would come and speak sometimes. I'm sure he's probably passed away now, but in '97 when I was going through Denfos, he came and spoke twice. One time I got to watch him, and I was in a room of a bunch of people, so I got to meet him in the sense that I got to say hello to him, but never got to talk to him personally. But yeah, he came and talked about that. Here's another interesting factoid: I don't know if it was the direct replacement or like 2 replacements down, but in real life, Adrian Cronauer on that broadcast when he left, he was replaced, or his replacement was replaced by Pat Sajak, who was an AFM broadcaster. Yeah.
So the Wheel of Fortune guy?
Yeah, Pat
that.
Sajak was an AFM broadcaster. You can fact check me on that, but I don't know if it was.
Yeah, Jed said yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if it was immediately after, but yeah, Adrian Cronauer and Pat Sajak worked on the same military network.
crazy.
That's crazy.
Best clip in that movie was when was it? Yeah, I can't remember if he was Master Sergeant, Sergeant Major, but he said, "What's 3 up and 3 down mean to you?" And he was like, "End of an inning." And so I could just imagine, because that's where I was at when I retired. I could just imagine an E4 saying that to me, and just like the rage that would come over your face. But I mean, he was a funny guy. Was he funny in person?
Yeah, he was. I mean, everyone, and he even says this when he talks. Like, everyone's expecting Robin Williams, so it's always a letdown because he's like,
"Oh yeah,
I'm funny, but I'm not Robin Williams funny." And and that's kind of was always going to laugh. But yeah, and he was. I mean, he was a funny guy, but nothing compared. It was nothing like the Robin Williams character.
Yeah, there was when I was in Afghanistan, we had Arlie Emery came and did this big, kind of USO tour thing, and you would think it would be like stories of him doing like kick-ass, badass. I'm doing this. It was a comedy show, and he crushed it. I have never laughed so hard because he was just talking about, Barbara Walters said so, something like this. If she says one more thing, I'm going to go right up to her, in his voice. I'm going to go right up to her property. I'm going to drop my pants and put a deuce right on her front step. If she comes out and she says anything, I want to tell her to just suck it up. And you're just like, what is going on right now? I'm ready for him to just start yelling. But I really, you get done with that and you're like, that was one of the greatest things I've ever, because you just never think.
Yeah.
That was going to go down like that.
Unexpected.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we get out of the Marine Corps. We come home. Do we come home?
No. So I had met a girl in Norfolk, Virginia.
That's where it starts.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it was a bit of a scandalous relationship. I was 22 and she was 34. So which is, like, yeah. So,
My man.
Yeah.
Shoemake.
What she was the, I say this only because my wife knows this, so I'm not telling tales out of school, but she was the, when you come back from long deployments, have those transition people that'll come and talk to you about how to come back and be normal.
Yep.
So she was teaching the transition classes, and I was doing a story about the transition classes. And so I got to interview her and got to talking to her. Turns out her family was from Connecticut. My good buddy lived in Long Island, and I was going to visit him when we got back. So I'm like, we should meet up in New York City. It was relatively close to both of us. And so she agreed. We went on a date, and she lived in Norfolk, Virginia, and she found out about a job at General Dynamics doing public relations. And so she made an introduction for me, and I got an interview and got the job. And between getting the job and moving, she and I broke up. It was the age gap, I think.
Yeah.
Really, when you're on a ship joking around is one thing. When you're actually spending day to day, that 15, 14-year age gap really shows.
Because you're probably, let's do something. She's like, I'm ready for bed.
Oh, it was so funny because I'm 46 now. So like I can't even imagine dealing with, someone that much younger. Because it was totally, so she was very much, in where very age appropriate stuff. I was into age appropriate stuff. It just didn't meld. So, but he'll be forever grateful because, she's the reason I got the job in Norfolk. And funny enough, I wouldn't have met my wife, who's from that area, had I not got that job. So I got a job at General Dynamics doing public relations. This would have been in June of 2001.
So this is right before, so when 9/11 happened, like what did that, like you just came out of service, like I need to jump back in or?
Yeah, so what's funny, so I was working, so 2001, your computers weren't super sophisticated, but we had a little app that could open up CNN on our computers at work. And that was pretty novel at the time. So we're sitting in the office. I was in a cubicle, and a guy next to me, Chris Verton, was a retired Navy Master Chief. And he said, man, you need to open up CNN. So I opened it up, and it was after the first plane had hit, and watched the second plane hit live. What was really interesting for us, though, is, we had a team of guys at the Pentagon that day doing just normal work. And so for us, it was the Pentagon was the bigger concern, at least personally, because we had our guys there. And, you know, I think everybody knew when the second plane hit, this was not accidental. And then the Pentagon information got released. And so it was huge. And I did talk about going back in. But the problem is, at that point, I didn't really want to go back in as a journalist. And there wasn't really a way to go back in and lat move, get to activate and lat move. I had some buddies that went back in, but for me, I wanted to go. If I was going to do it, I wanted to go do it. What was really interesting too, where I worked at General Dynamics, we did concept development, figuring out ways to fight asymmetric warfare and that sort of thing. And we had a small little contract, and then 9/11 changed but for most of the military, but for that specifically, because part of our job was wargaming these asymmetrical enemies, and how do we do that? And so we had some really good concept development guys. Like, I don't know if he would have been known. I don't know if either of you guys spent any time in Korea, but one of the concept developers that worked with us was a guy named Gary Luck. He was a 4-star general who was the USFK commander. Mm-hmm. He worked with us, and brilliant guy. General Anthony Zinni, when he retired, worked with us. And so you got to meet these really amazing leaders of the military. And so that was really cool, working with those guys. And as a PR guy, part of my job was to sit in the meetings and help take their very, very high level, brilliant thought and get it to a place that they could explain it to media and to people like me who are a lot dumber than them. And so, and that's a lot of times what journalism is, right? Is taking high level thought or intricate thought and kind of a lot of ways politics the same way and law, really. Yeah. Taking these complicated concepts and explaining them to people who don't do it for a living. Yeah. And so that was my job. And so I got to work, particularly General Zinni. He was just, I don't know if you guys probably know who that is, right? Tony Zinni. He was a Marine General. Yeah. So he was just the nicest, very serious, but just the nicest guy. I met him at the little mess hall they had at the place, and just really, really good dude. All those guys. You meet these guys and you understand why. Okay, well, I see why this guy accomplished what he accomplished. Like, they're different. Yeah,
there was a movie. I think the best illustration I ever saw was like Brad Pitt had a movie where he played he was coming in as the commander for Afghanistan, the new commander for Afghanistan. They were trying to
was that like the satire, the one that he did? Like where he was like the Tommy Franks character?
Kind of, that. But you saw that guy was on the go 24/7, but like he was quirky. There was some things where like not normal people ask these things, but at the same time, just always on the go thinking about how to get the job done. So I agree 100%.
I think it's interesting to hear you say how you took what they said and you sort of explained it, and you do that, and we'll get into it a little later on. But you do that for the police officers today, right? You sort of explain the law.
Well, I not so much. Well, now I do it. I don't want to say against, but I do more criminal defense work now. But as a prosecutor, which is that for almost half a decade. But it's exactly, and even now, still explaining it to a jury and explaining it to. Sometimes to the officers, right? Sometimes talking to an officer and saying, kind of very respectfully saying, here's why I think you kind of missed it on the law a little bit.
Right. Well, yeah.
So when do we start getting motivated to get into law school? I know that your family played a part into kind of.
Yeah, it was sort of one of those necessity is the mother of all inventions moments. So after working as a contractor, I met my wife, we got married. She really loved it down here. It was her idea to come back to my home because she was a military brat, so didn't really have like roots in Virginia so much. Her parents were there, but extended family all over. So when she would visit, she liked the small townness of it. My parents, grew up here. My brother's kids, for example, are the 5th generation of Shoemakes to go to the church they go to in Camden. So she liked that. So she said, let's go back to your home. So we did that. I got a job in Sumter as a newspaper editor. But man, I think I was making, I don't remember what it was. This would have been 2005, 6, and I was making $600 a week, maybe, and
it's hard to start a family on that.
Well, and journalism's tough too, because it was way less than what I was making as a defense contractor. And those types of opportunities just aren't as prevalent down here as it would be in a place like Virginia. And so, what's tough about it, journalism is by 2005, 2006, if you're not an internet guy and you're not doing the web-based stuff, which I didn't learn that stuff, it's hard to make a living unless you move a lot. And the whole point of coming down here was to settle and not bounce around. And so it was a great job. Loved those folks at the Sumter Item dearly. But the paper, during the brief time I was there, went from daily to, I think, 6 times a week. And now it's, I think, just a couple times a week now. And so I was kind of figuring out what I was going to do. My wife found out she was pregnant with, we find out later, our son. And, it's one of those moments where it's like, okay, well, I was 26, 27 years old, and I've got to decide, what am I going to do? And I'd always had kind of a passing interest in politics and law. I was that kid growing up that people said, oh, you argue a lot, you'd probably be a lawyer. But I didn't think much about it. But then looking at different options or places I could work, I decided to do that. And so I applied to law school, just USC. I didn't apply anywhere else because, again, I wasn't moving. The whole point is we were anchored here. So I was going to find something. So I applied just to USC and got in. And my son was born. I started law school in August. My son was born in September. And then my daughter surprised us 13 months later. So
Oh my goodness.
it was a busy couple of years.
This my daughter just walked by. She was my middle and my youngest. She's my youngest. Same thing. My middle one was born, and I was like, man, I need to go to school and it was a daughter. Because now I'm thinking about, I got to pay for a wedding,
Yeah.
So now I need to get educated. I need to set myself up for life. And then I think 6 months after she was born, we found out that she was on the way. And everybody's like, do you guys know what's causing that? I have an idea.
Exactly. Yeah.
I just thought the doctor was kidding, saying just be careful because it's, it's easy.
Yeah,
I didn't think it was
she was even on that. It's a low dose, but they're on the low dose birth control when they're nursing.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yep.
she was on that. And so when she came in, it's funny, I think it's a very guy reaction, because when she came and told me she was pregnant with Abby, she was very upset. Not upset that we were having a kid, just the, we had, I guess, what, a 8-month-old, or maybe less than a year. Well, younger than that, actually, because they're only 13 months apart. So she came in and said, that she was pregnant. But for me, it was almost a relief, because it's like I'd wanted a bunch of kids, and then we had one kid, and I'm like, oh, one's good. This is work. Like I imagine myself as like a father, like 5 or 6, until I had a kid, and I'm like,
Yes.
no, I'm a father of one.
Yeah.
And so then, when she said she was pregnant, I'm like, cool, because now we got the full set. Like now I don't have to make a decision. It's easy to react. So I was actually very cool with it. And honestly, now it's great because they're close in age. But yeah, that was a rough time. I think the closest I've ever come in my life to a full blown panic attack was in the hospital when my daughter was born. It was November 16th, and my constitutional law exam was like 5 days later. My son was with my parents, and they brought Abby in to nurse, and she was crying. She fussed a lot those first couple of years. She was crying, and I remember laying there, which again, my wife did all the hard work, to be fair, but I'm laying there looking at this con law book that's, 3 or 4 inches thick. And I'm just thinking, like, everything rides on. Like, I've got to make sure all this is taken care of. Like my wife's going to be, she's a teacher, but she wanted to stay home with the kids at least till they were younger. That was a big goal of hers. And, just thinking that pressure. And it wasn't so much about me, right? There's nothing about my life has ever made me panicked or scared, but just thinking about, I got to take care of all these people. And I tell you what, boy, I did well in law school, but it wasn't hard to do well, because what else choice do you have when a gun's at your head, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Yeah, motivating to take care of your family becomes like that can get you locked up for what I need to get done. That can sink you in real quick.
yeah.
I understand that 100. Like when I retired, I think all of us have a story similar of like, James is retired, Cliff did his thing, get out, and especially during that transition period, like we bear that burden for our family on our shoulder. Like, it's us. We got this. You focus on that, but I'm going to take care of this, and it'll lock you in to make sure you're successful. So when you get done with law school, what's the first step? Do you go right into like public defending, or what's the pipeline there?
Yeah, so it's different for everybody. So I worked for a couple federal judges as kind of a law clerk. That's a great job because you get to watch a lot of cases and work with these prestigious guys, and you see or ladies, and you see kind of how the job is done, and you watch a lot of lawyers. That's wonderful. And then I went to a big law firm and did big kind of, big civil defense litigation for big pharmaceutical companies. But I knew that I wanted to do, I was always interested in the criminal side, always interested in having what I like to say clients with faces, or, victims with faces. And because when you represent big companies, it can be so different. I mean, it's a great living and there are a lot of people that do it well, but I wanted something a little more intimate. So it took a while. It took probably, it took 5 or 6 years of, working at some different places and building the resume until I had the resume to get into the U.S. Attorney's Office. It's a pretty political job. You have to be qualified, but you have to be qualified and connected. And so I didn't have lawyers in the family, as I mentioned. So a lot of it was taking those times to build up. I know this person, and then kind of building that pathway so I was on someone's radar and got the job at the U.S. Attorney's Office. And that's really what I went to law school to do. And I did that for 5-6 years.
God, Cliff, every time he talks, I just start slowly hearing the Law and Order theme song play in my head. Like, doom, 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 doom.
Yeah, let me tell you, the worst person on earth to watch that stuff with is definitely a lawyer, particularly a criminal lawyer. My wife's like, every time we'll watch anything like that, I'm like, can you pause? And she's like,
do you like explain what's wrong with
right,
this? Let me tell you what's wrong here.
I'm like, this is way too, these things take way too long. That's not how that would happen.
That's not true, honey.
That's right.
I tell them my girlfriend the same exact thing. I'm like, she's like, your doctor said you were overweight. No, not really, not really. I should have been a lawyer.
Yeah,
I should have been a lawyer.
Oh yeah, you're no fun in those TV shows. You just want to, yeah.
I like that with military. Like Cliff, what was that one you told me to watch the other day? And we went to the gym next day. I'm like, what? I couldn't enjoy it. Badland? Bad Man?
It whatever it was.
It was about
like, you know what? It was good.
No.
For Netflix, it was good.
No. It was the premise
free.
was it was a UAV operator and Ford.
I did watch that with Russell Crowe, who's like a 9,000-year-old captain. Yeah, I did see that. Yeah, I thought the same thing, and I'm like, I could let it go in Maverick because in Maverick I actually did the research. I'm like, I don't think you can be an 06 and still be in after that many years. But then they had the whole Iceman was his mentor. Like, I was okay, a general can make a lot of things happen, and he's an 06. Yeah. But Russell Crowe wearing an unbuttoned, unbuttoned BDUs, and it's like, I'm a captain. It's like, I did the wrong thing. I'm like, you wouldn't. I'm with them on that.
Yeah. Well, the first one was
Bird alert. Bird alert.
the very first scene with one of the female enlisted's walking down the hallway and she's wearing Air Force tags with an Army rank, and I'm like, who is the technical advisor on this movie? Like, this dude needs to get fired. So the whole time I'm telling my wife, I'm like, that's not correct. And then of course at the last minute he's like, abort.
You and Derek are the same.
Stop.
Yeah,
look, I just want my movies to be accurate. Like,
I can look past certain things, but that one, like, Captain,
thank you,
55-year-old,
thank you,
over, and I'm not saying I'm a big guy myself, but I'm also not a captain. A 55-year-old overweight, Russell Crowe captain. That was hard. Every time I saw it, I'm like, I thought at first, honestly, when I saw it, I'm like, oh, he's probably a retired dude wearing his old uniform,
like a contractor, right?
Yeah, that's what I thought. I'm like, oh, he's that guy, and then I'm like, wait, he's calling something. I'm like, I mean, it was so hard. Like, for the first 15 minutes, I was trying to figure out, he's not, clearly they don't expect us to believe he's an active duty Army or Air Force officer.
Yeah. Is there there's no, like, I know that the Air Force is really lax on body fat composition, but this movie just takes it. Hey, advisor, what should we do here for, you're good, dude. Just put like a cardigan on him and just make him grumpy.
By the way, speaking of advisors, here's an interesting, the little military public affairs world. There's a guy he's retired as a captain because he was a Mustang officer. So he enlisted, you guys know that term in the Marines. So it's what the Marine Corps calls officers that were enlisted. That's their term for that, Mustang.
Mustang?
Yeah, Mustang officers. Yeah, so, and in the Marine Corps, it's a big point of pride. Like, if you were a former enlisted person that became an officer, it's a real big deal. So Mustang officer. So Dale Dye and a lot of those guys retire with relatively low ranks because they have the 15, 12, 13-year enlisted career. So he retired as an 03, but was an enlisted guy, Dale Dye, and he was a public affairs officer. He started, I can't remember the name of the company. If you Google, he's everywhere. In fact, if you Google his picture, you'll see him and recognize him immediately. He was
I know who Dale Dye is.
Yeah. He was a military advisor for Platoon, Saving Private Ryan. And so I've actually met him 2 or 3 times because he'll come to he would come so my very first little duty station was in Beaufort at the air station there. And that's where I got attached to that unit that went to Hungary and then went over to Lejeune. But he would come to Paris Island a lot to just, either blowing up on stuff or just, go to stuff, and he'd get invited to stuff. And he would always come and talk to the public affairs guys because that was the job he did. And man, listen to his stories. And like he tells a story about how he got into platoon. He got one of the riders. He went where the riders would go, the bars the riders would go. And he got a rider drunk and convinced him to give him Oliver Stone's phone, or convinced the rider to get Oliver Stone's phone number.
Her picture.
Or a bigger picture.
Yeah. See what he looks like. Yeah, I know that he's done a lot of technical advisement on a lot of movies.
You'll recognize him from. Do you remember the movie Outbreak with the monkeys?
Yes.
He played the guy that Donald Sutherland's character kept crapping on, and he finally arrested him.
Yeah.
The colonel. I can't remember his name, but he played that character.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So he's been in a bunch of stuff, but he started this military advising company.
Oh, cool.
And he would hire most of the folks he would hire were a lot of public affairs guys. Mm-hmm. And in part because one of the beauty of public affairs is you're with so many different units, you get exposed to a lot of different, ways of life about different military subcultures. And like, for example, in the Marine Corps, the AAV community, which is fascinating. Probably one of the stories I had, I think that got published the most places, was about AAVs and how AAV operators, amphibious assault vehicle operators, don't mess around with apricots. And like, it's a big deal. And if there's some urban legend about apricots causing AAVs to malfunction, with some World War II during the island hopping campaign, a bunch of AAVs sank. Again, no idea if this is true. But this is the urban legend. So I was on an AAV one time, and some crew chief, I was doing a story on some other unit, and this crew chief said, nobody, no apricots. And I kind of laughed. That's a weird fruit. I don't know a lot of people that just eat apricots. And so afterwards, I'm like, I don't get the apricot joke. He's like, it's not a joke. He's like, do you have an apricot? I'm like, no, man, I don't have an apricot. And he said, he tells me like, yeah, because like they'll, it's like the gremlin of the AAV community. And so I started talking to these guys, and turns out universally, you talk to these AAV guys, it's this weird thing with apricots. I mean, there were all kinds of weird traditions. One guy, if he thought someone had an apricot, he would not get in his AAV until a chaplain would bless it. And so I wrote this story about AAVs and apricots. It's still on the internet. If you Google apricots, AAVs, and my name, you'll see it. But it's about how there is, they hate it so much. And so that went everywhere. And so that, I think, one of the interesting things about the job I did in the military and the job I do as a lawyer is about when you're talking to a jury or trying to win a case or trying to write a story, it's finding that unique angle that are going to make people interested and listen. And if I can get you hooked on this AAV apricot idea, I can put a lot of other stuff in there. I can tell you about this boy from Ohio. I can put kids' names in there and hometowns. And, that's how you can get people reading about other things. I mean, it's like anything, right? It's like your kids when they don't want to eat their stuff. If you put broccoli inside of a brownie, they're going to eat it a lot more often. So you learn where these sort of, these interesting things are.
Yeah.
Or other things.
I don't know if I would eat it more.
What if you didn't know?
I
wouldn't tell you. That's the whole point. You don't tell them.
What if I just made some brownies and threw some apricots and some
That's right.
some broccoli, maybe some asparagus up in there?
Well, I like asparagus.
Oh, okay.
I would eat that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would probably eat the broccoli too, especially if it was hooked up with a brownie. That sounds like deliciousness.
I don't know if I'm trying to think if the Army had like we really never had like huge superstitions. Like I saw there was this movie or this HBO miniseries called Generation Kill, and they talked about the charms. And I've heard about charms before in vehicles, which I thought was another great show because it showed how like what the conversation said in a truck amongst four people. Yeah. So my wife, I was like, that's probably the most accurate thing I've ever seen in the military. But did you have any?
No.
So by the way, Generation Kill, there's an actor in that, Rudy Reyes.
Rudy, he was actually in that.
So he comes here a good bit. He lives in Charleston now. I've met him several times. So Tom Mullican, who's an attorney in Camden, Rudy's part of something called Blue Force, Force Blue. They do ecological work. And what I'll do is I don't know, I'll talk to Tom about maybe getting some of his Blue Force people because they would be fascinating to talk to because it's this group of special forces guys that have become environmentalists and work on they're building right now. I don't know if it's this group, but a group is building an artificial reef at Parris Island. as part of these like efforts, but it's these veterans that are trying to protect the environment. And it's really interesting. And so, but Rudy Reyes is part of that kind of crew. And so he and his wife have relocated to Charleston. He comes to the Cup a lot as Tom's guest. So met him a couple of times.
The only other famous person.
Look, there it is, by the way.
Is this it?
Yeah.
What is this?
Apricots. If you,
I'd be damned.
yeah. Apricots AAVs, no happy pair. Yeah. So. Yeah.
That is super. People are so superstitious. I was talking to Mike, my other buddy Mike, and he was talking about his. He's gonna go to his in-laws at Christmas, but they have to set up a special TV so he can watch the Steelers, and they're not allowed in the room when he watches them. So it's a whole.
Why?
Thing. Yeah. Well, because if they start losing. At halftime, him and his wife have to leave to go home because they've won every time he's been at home with the Steelers. You know how
Wow.
That's taking it too far, man.
he's my buddy. Hey,
I've heard the people, like, have you ever heard the snapping?
no, but hey, my girlfriend, like, when I'm not moving fast
Not
enough-
this snap.
Oh, I got you.
Yeah, well, yeah. Let us know if any of them want to come on. We'd love to
That'd be
have them,
awesome.
especially since
Yeah.
that was a great miniseries. But I can't think, man. The
Well, I
Marines
was
are weird.
actually mentioning to Tom that I was coming on this today, and mentioned to him I'd like to make an introduction. So Tom was an Army JAG, I think Army JAG, but also the retired. South Carolina has a state guard. It's kind of volunteer force.
Yep.
He's the retired commanding general for the state guard, and he is the nominee now. He wouldn't be able to do it till January, but he is the nominee to be the new director of DNR. The Department of Natural Resources for South Carolina.
Good.
So
I could talk to him about my boat taxes and how to reduce them.
So he should be the new DNR director by the end of January. But I did mention to him, and so he's someone to be happy to link you guys up with as well.
that'd be great.
That'd be awesome.
So when we get into litigation here, and you're an attorney general, like, was it everything you cracked up to? Because it sounds like that's what you wanted to do. You were pretty pegged on it.
It was. I mean, so being a federal prosecutor is it's a really neat job, a serious job. When I started, I did violent crime or kind of violent crime narcotics. And then I moved over into white collar. And weirdly enough, in a lot of districts, ours included, white collar prosecutors also handle the human trafficking, because human trafficking looks a lot like white collar crime because a lot of it's financial based. You can, if you drill down into enough crime, I mean, almost always people are doing it for money or sex. That's just, I mean, it's hard. I mean, there are some crimes that don't fit that bill, but particularly crimes that are planned. I mean, a premeditated crime, a spur of the moment crime is a little bit different, passion, things like that. But if you're committing an ongoing criminal enterprise, it's almost always for money or sex. And human trafficking obviously hits both of them. And so it was, I mean, it's taxing, but it's very rewarding. And I probably would have stayed much longer, but the reality is when you have a job like that, the person at the top is appointed by the president. And so they kind of change like the wind. And so I went through 4 or 5 I went through about a U.S. attorney a year for various reasons. They'd get promoted. One U.S. attorney, my favorite, she's the one who hired me, became a federal judge. And so, her replacement was awesome. But then President Biden got elected. It's a new U.S. attorney. And I get along great with the current U.S. attorney, but when you start seeing those changes, it's like, okay, well, the trajectory's changing, and so there's a question of, do I want to stay? Do I want to stay on and continue to do this work? And what happened for me was, as that administration shift was happening, my law partner Ben Connell had just got elected to the state house. That opened up a spot on the county council, and a chance for me to come back to Kershaw County and work. And so that's sort of, I know we're kind of skipping ahead, but that's sort of what led me to
Well,
leave.
I got to ask you, like, when you're dealing with these violent crime cases, I mean, how do you process that? Because I know you got to see the evidence, right? The evidence presented before you. So how do you process that?
I'll tell you. So that's bad. The human trafficking's worse, because with human trafficking, you have to watch the stuff.
Yeah.
So you have a child trafficking case, which is almost always video. So you have to watch it, and it sticks with you, right? I mean, in a really substantial way, and that's part of the reason people don't do it for a long period of time, right? Because it's not something you can do forever. I mean, but for both of those, I think I don't know if you guys find this to be the case. But most military people I know, at least people who are successful in the military, are really good at compartmentalization. I think it's something that, I don't know if it's a skill people who are good at it go to the military, or the military, builds that skill. But the two things I've noticed kind of universally with the vets that I know, they're pretty good at compartmentalization and they're horrible at moderation. Those seems to be the two things that I noticed about vets. And so I resemble that remark completely. And so for me,
Cliff and moderation.
oh, dude.
Food, alcohol.
Yeah, everything, right? I mean, it's why I can be so good at something, but it's just moderation. And so, and compartmentalization is critical. And so it was just kind of putting it in a bucket. One of the biggest cases that I worked on the kind of the violent crime side was, remember the eclipse that we had here? I don't know if you guys were living here during the eclipse, but obviously
I just moved here. I just moved here.
My kids went down to your house.
Yep.
Yeah.
So on the day the eclipse happened, down in Conway, South Carolina, at a little bank called Crestcom. It's not there anymore, but if you're driving to Myrtle Beach, there's this little coffee house called Central Perk or something like that. It's that's the Friends Cafe, but it's a name like that, and it's kind of right in the middle of the road. There's like a Bojangles and some stuff around it, and there used to be this little Crestcom National Bank. And on the day of the eclipse, two ladies were working there, Donna Major and Katie Skeen. Katie Skeen's a relatively young woman. She's the bank manager. Donna Major is 61, 62. She was literally journaling just before a customer walks in about the fact that she wanted to watch the eclipse, but she had to work. And she said, maybe I'll live to see the next one. And mentions about how she was thinking today about how she turned her life over to Jesus all these years before. And this is in her journal. A guy walks into the bank, a guy named Brandon Council. Brandon Council walks into the bank, and from what we saw in the video, we'll never know what was said, but we know what happened. We know that Brandon Council walks up to Donna Major, who's working the teller. She holds up a piece of paper because she's reading something, and she says like this, puts her head back down. He looks behind himself, pulls a revolver from his waistband, and shoots Donna Major in the head. Donna Major collapses. He then snaps his head, what we later believe and forensics sort of show is probably him hearing Katie Skeen scream. So he runs to Katie's office. And the forensics show that he probably kills Katie with a shot to the head and a shot to the abdomen. Not sure which order. Jumps back across the counter and puts another round in Donna Major. Steals the money, steals one of their cars, drives back to North Carolina, where he's originally from. Buys a car, a really crappy, gosh, I can't believe I don't remember the car. It's really crappy, like BMW or Mercedes.
Was it a four-cylinder Mustang?
No, it was like a Mercedes-Benz. It was whatever 50 Cent bought in Get Rich or Die Trying, because that was something and that wasn't the same model, but whatever, it was Mercedes-Benz or BMW. Buys that, ends up getting caught 3 or 4 days later after a big intensive manhunt with a 16-year-old prostitute. That case went federal, and because it happened in the Florence area, which was my area, I became part of the prosecution team. And so myself and two other guys were the prosecutors for that case. We sought the death penalty, and over a very, very lengthy trial and jury selection, we got the death penalty. And so Brandon Council is now in Terre Haute, Indiana, where the people go who are on federal death row awaiting a potential death sentence. And that case was, at times sort of all-encompassing. And what's weird is watching that evidence and watching the pictures and the autopsy stuff. I mean, it's graphic, but what really hits you as a lawyer, particularly, is part of the job in a death penalty case is you have to prove they did it. That part was easy. It was on video. Most of it was on video. Some of it wasn't, but enough was on video. That was going to be easy. But in a death penalty case, you've got to prove they did it. And then there's this whole second trial, and that's what the hard part is. And that's where you have to argue to the jury why this person should get the death penalty. Mm-hmm. And that's the guilt phase. Oh, I'm sorry, the penalty phase. Guilt phase, did they do it? Penalty phase, what do they get? So when you make that argument, you have to talk about these factors. The defense is talking about mitigating factors, like the guy's childhood, which was admittedly horrific, and things that happened to him. You're talking about aggravating factors, things he did that, make him more deserving of the ultimate punishment. And in doing that, the victims have to talk, or the victim's family in this case. And so part of my job in the penalty phase was I had Donna Major's family. They were sort of my witnesses. I had to go to their house, a couple of times and sit down and repeatedly relive what was up to that point probably the worst moment of their lives, and poke and prod with it, not in a callous way, But I had a job to do, and I have to show this jury of 12 people, more than 12 technically because there's alternates, but ultimately 12 that will vote. I've got to show this jury of 12 people why this crime was so bad. You put anybody on a witness stand in federal court, it's a big old room with all the wood and the people, they get nervous. And so the judge limited us to 15, 20 minutes per witness. And so I've got 20 minutes to convey this years of relationship and pain and suffering that I know about to this jury. And so you become very calculated, right? You have to be. So you're talking to this person about their mom, and you know the trigger memories, right? I know when talking to her son that the mom had just finished a blanket and given it to the son, and that's what sent the son off. And so if he's not emotional enough, then I go to the blanket. And you feel very methodical, and that in and of itself is pretty emotional. You don't get emotional because you're being, I wore a watch backwards on my wrist because I'm watching the time. I've got my notes. And so you're almost like you're conducting some kind of morbid orchestra. And I don't say that to say that there's any pleasure in it, but just to say that you really your job is to, sometimes showing the jury what happened and the emotion requires you to step away from it. Nobody felt that case other than the family members. Nobody felt that case harder than the prosecution team. But when you're in the trenches, so to speak, it's methodical. And it's not until after it's over that there's the sort of dump. So the hardest thing about those cases, particularly the ones with victims, it's living with the victim. In a human trafficking case, sitting with the father of a little girl who got basically snuck out of her bedroom night after night to be trafficked, and listening to that father feel helpless and weak and understand, like, there's no one you can go kill now. He's locked up. Like you missed your chance. And not that he should have done it or should have known, but just that feeling of helplessness. And you see this little girl that's going to need years of therapy. Like, that's the stuff. And that's what's interesting, because I didn't serve in combat, right? I served in the Kosovo Air War, but I didn't serve in combat and I was in infantry. So I didn't serve in sort of hand-to-hand, face-to-face combat. And it's interesting to talk to my friends that did, because there's the similarities there are, it was never the moment, right? It's what happened after the moment before, right? And that's the same thing in a trial. Like, the moment of doing the trial, that's one thing, but it's thinking about these families, and you see things that kind of remind you of these families. And that's something that I think sticks with every prosecutor.
Do you think that there's a lot of, like, after you get done, with your side, you close your side of the argument, do you immediately go into reflection of, did I hit everything that I needed to hit? Did I do everything I was supposed to do? Did I represent this family the best that I could? Or does it wait till the verdict comes out?
No, you think immediately. You start and you talk to the family, and they talk to you. And so there's, there were three of us. I was kind of, so there were, the main guy trying it was a guy named Nathan Williams, amazing lawyer down in Charleston. He was on the Dylan Roof case. He was the prosecutor. He was one of the two or three. He was one of the lead prosecutor on the Dylan Roof case, became a judge in the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. Nathan was sort of the number two on that, and he was the number one in this case. Another guy, Everett McMillan, federal prosecutor still, amazing prosecutor. And so those guys were the sort of barometer. You talk to those guys, like you're living with those guys. And the boss I was telling you about, Sherry Lydon, who's a federal judge, was supposed to be in the seat I was in, but she got nominated to be a federal judge right when that case was getting warmed up. So I was brought in to replace her. And so she was kind of sitting behind us because she was still our boss until she became the federal judge. And so that was your team. Like, you went to them and said, like, what do I need to do? And there's no time to sort of mince words. It's like, do I need to do this? Do this. And so there's a lot of, very direct and honest feedback, and it has to be. And again, you start talking through these things, and you see a really clear similarity between doing something like that and then being in the military. A lot of similar values, a lot of gallows humor, right? I won't get into some of that because that's not appropriate given the context of the case I just talked about. But you know how it is. You can't go through something like that, and it can't live inside of you as serious as it really is, because it'll collapse you. So you make light of it. And so, not light of the case, not light of the people ever, but just light of the job in general.
That's how a lot of people process that.
Right.
We were just talking the other day, what's comedy? Nothing but tragedy plus time. And sometimes for some people to process it, like I remember a couple of times where I'm like, can you believe what just happened? And it was, nothing to write home to mom about.
Yeah.
And everybody just kind of lightly giggles all of a sudden. Probably the most inappropriate response after something like that happens to a group of individuals or individual, but just a slight little laughter that kind of builds upon itself. And,
Yeah.
Anybody from the outside looking in be like, are you guys gone crazy? Have you lost? No, this is how you process it.
Well, and it's work, right? I mean, you can't divorce yourself from the fact that this is your job, and that there's good things and bad things about that. But meaning that you can't take it home with you every day. Now you have to. Sometimes you're going to. So in that case, I actually moved out. So we did jury selection for about 4 or 5 weeks, and the trial was about 3 or 4 weeks, about 2 months, two months and some change of active trying litigation. So it's a long time to be in a courtroom. During most of that time frame, I moved out and got a hotel in Florence, and I'd come home on the weekends because at that time there was no opportunity for me to divorce myself from it. And I made the kids stuff. It wasn't like I was absent, but I was sort of like I was on like a deployment light, where I was gone, but I'd come for the important stuff because I didn't want to bring that around the family, and I needed to that needed to be my world.
Yeah. And
I would literally go get dinner from a little restaurant, and I'd bring it back to my hotel room, and I would eat by myself and just think about the next day and the things that we had to do because, that's the kind of case where there should be no laughter in the room, right? It's not like a typical, like a drug case where you can kind of be funny with the jury a little bit and kind of be folksy. Nobody wants a folksy prosecutor in a death penalty case, And it's even, it's particularly tough. I'll tell you, the defense lawyer in that case was one of my dearest friends, one of the best trial lawyers I've ever seen. And he's now the federal public defender for the entire state. Did a great job, but it's a tough job. That they have a job to do as well. And, particularly in the penalty phase, but did a great job trying to, explain to the jury, this is a human being. And it was really interesting. When we got the verdict, I came home, this would have been, 2019. So my son would have been about 13-ish, 14-ish. And I remember coming home and they knew what I was doing, broad strokes, And so after it was over, I came home. They knew that the verdict had come back with guilty on both charges for both victims. And my son said, Dad, are you happy that he got the death penalty? And it's a really weird question because, my answer to him was no. I mean, I'm happy the family has what they wanted in justice. I'm happy we were able to deliver that. But, me and my son talked a lot about, you really should never be happy when someone's dead, particularly when you had and he's not dead yet, but when you had a hand in it. I mean, at some point he'll be executed. And that happened because me and Nathan and Everett, did a job and got him there. And it's a heavy thing, and particularly to do it over 2 months. It wasn't just a moment, like over two, and there were all these discussions with the family about, do you want to do this? The bad thing about a death penalty case is you're dealing with it for years.
Do you feel good? Like what's the conversation with the families after the case is over? I mean, I'm sure there's got to be joy, but there's got to be is the closure good? Is it bad? What is it?
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't say joy. Well, I think what you have is relief.
Yeah.
They're grateful, to us, which is, they don't need to be. We were just doing our job. They're somewhat grateful, but mostly just sort of a sense of, okay, we can be at peace now. For we've got the verdict. Our family members have been spoken for. The little boy, Katie had 2 teenage boys. And he wrote an Instagram post that I still have not read all the way. Mm-hmm. It just, because it was just.
Was it a thank you or just?
It was about his mom and the things he loved about his mom. And it really wasn't directly tied to the case. It was just something he wrote sort of as the case was wrapping up. And it's something I could, I had to read it one time, but I've never been able to read it in one sit, if that makes sense. I could, read it in pieces. Yeah. So that's, but they're, it's like a drain for them. It's not euphoria. It's almost the opposite of euphoria, but it's a conclusion. And I think they sort of take in the conclusion.
How long does it take for the prosecutor team to decompress all that and get ready for the next one? Or is it like, hey, good job, here's your next case?
It takes longer. It probably takes longer than, I know it takes longer than the time you have, right? Mm-hmm. So you just kind of do it when you can, and the crazy thing is you work a case like this, Bill, your average prosecutor at the federal, now state level is way, way more files. At the federal level, you might be working 30 to 50 files if you're a really top, high, productive prosecutor. And those cases are all just waiting on you when you get into a big trial like this because you don't have time for anything else. Mm-hmm. Our days, a typical day in a case like that will start at 4 or 5 a.m., end at 10, 11, because what will happen is trials from 9 to 5. But some issues will come up in trial inevitably in a case like that. And the particular judge we had, it was a judge I used to work for, Judge Brian Harwell, great judge, but he was moving that trial. You know, he wasn't. And so they raise issues around lunch. 5:30 comes and he says, hey, we're going to have a hearing at 8:30 or 8 a.m. on these issues. So brief them tonight. And so you go back and brief the issues, get ready for the next day. So you've got all your prep, but you have an 8-hour day. So they're long days. And so then you get back, you take a few days off, maybe a week off, but then you're right back at it.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't. That is long days. I don't think you guys get enough.
No, I mean
respect.
No, I mean, you got the shows that kind of talk about it, but like really, that's a grind. I mean, how many months was that?
That's a rare thing. It was 2 months. Like trials like that are the exception. Like most trials are a week. Maybe 2 weeks is a long trial in most cases. Like a month or 2 month trial experience is definitely the exception to the rule. It was interesting. The guy who helped us with jury selection, that was one of my areas, was jury selection. And the guy who helped us was the same guy who did the Boston Marathon bombing jury.
Oh,
he was the advisor for that. He said they were in jury selection for like 4 or 5 months because that case made national news and everyone had heard about it. So it was really important that you get these folks that can, be honest. That case got overturned on appeal, but then flipped back. So it was ultimately upheld, but initially the appellate court said we reversed it, but then a larger appellate court or a more full appellate court flipped it back again. So that verdict is standing now.
So I want to talk about COVID-19. You did some work on COVID-19 fraud. I know with the PPE loans, that was like the biggest thing that was being on the news about fraud PPE loans. What exactly was happening in South Carolina?
Yeah, so the Secret Service's numbers, as I recall, and it's been a while since I've looked at the data, but about $43 billion in fraud in that program.
Good.
And that was their best guess. And I think you can trace billions of that here to South Carolina. You'd have, and I won't name the town, but there was a specific town in South Carolina that has a population of a few thousand people. It's not in Kershaw County, that I will say. There's a town in South Carolina, not in Kershaw County, a couple thousand people in it. And if you look at the PPP data, you would see that roughly 1,000 people in that town, almost a third or more of the town's population, got a PPP loan, an individual PPP loan. To get an individual or sole proprietor PPP loan, you had to be a business that generated the year before the pandemic over $100,000. And then now you don't. A lot of the fraud ones were going to be non-brick and mortar businesses, harder to prove. Barbers, marketers. And in this particular town, if you look at these almost 1,000 PPP loans, it's $20,000 loans, which means they had gross revenues of $100,000. So that means in this tiny little southern town that isn't particularly wealthy, there were almost 1,000 people or hundreds of people that made $100,000 the year before the pandemic. And a lot of them are like hairdressers. And it's like, you look at these numbers and you're like, this doesn't add up. The problem is, how do you prosecute someone who commits $20,000 in fraud when you have the $10-20 million in fraud, when you have an office of maybe 50 people, depending on your numbers at the time, you got 50 people, 50 prosecutors roughly at a time in the federal prosecutor's office and agents. So you sort of go after the big fish. But man, it was everywhere. And the more common fraud schemes were really blatant. It was just lying. It was so easy to get these loans. I mean, you literally filled out a piece of paper, sent it in, they gave you a loan. And so the common fraud was just claiming salary or claiming income for your business from the prior year that never existed. Or for the larger loans where you had multiple employees, you'd inflate the number of employees because it was based on that number. And that's where you got people that would get $2, $3, $4, $5 million. The very first one we ever prosecuted in South Carolina, and this is public. It was U.S. versus Dorsey, and this is the first PPP fraud case that got sentenced. I should say it's the first one that got sentenced. That was my case, and she did about $3 million in fraud loans, and she had multiple businesses, and she would inflate employees and say, I had, this many employees, and it was just all fabricated. Mm-hmm. And then, she would take that money and, use it for other things. And, that was the very first one we did, but they're multi-million-dollar fraud schemes. Two that are really interesting, particularly for you guys, I think you'll find interesting, that we prosecuted. And so, by the way, my role at the office, because I'd started doing some of these and when I got moved over to white collar, is I became the coronavirus fraud coordinator for the state. So South Carolina is one federal district from the legal standpoint, the District of South Carolina. And I was the coronavirus fraud coordinator for the District of South Carolina. So that means I handled cases and also helped attorneys that were handling other cases. I didn't handle them all. Like, we had brilliant attorneys handling a lot of the cases. I just it's more of an admin function. I kind of helped track the data. So I just had some familiarity with what was happening. And two types of cases that were really interesting. One is the prisons. The amount of COVID fraud that's happening and was happening, I should say, inside SCDC, South Carolina Department of Corrections, astronomical. And those tended to tie into, because in addition to the PPP loans, you had the expanded unemployment benefits for COVID, the pandemic unemployment PUE. And so what would happen is these inmates would get their, get the mothers of their children or their sisters or brothers or friends, and they would say, okay, I need your help. We're going to apply. And they get the problem of contraband prison cell phones is enormous, which is a whole nother issue, but that the state has tried to fix. But and it's not the state's reason they can't. And so, but they would have these contraband cell phones, so the inmates will go in and create accounts, and they'd buy PI from other places, or their friends would get it, and then they would create all these accounts in Arizona, Pennsylvania, the places that were doing these expanded unemployment benefits. And then they would have debit cards sent to these different addresses or mailed out, and then they would have their people go collect these debit cards and then funnel money back to them, and they'd take a cut, millions and millions of dollars in.
I can't even balance my checkbook. And these guys are doing these multi-million-dollar fraud cases
from prison.
From prison.
Crazy, yeah. And so the pandemic unemployment was a big one. And another one that we tapped into that we prosecuted involved service members. It started with I had I can't believe it, the Air Force's version of CID. I think it's OSI. A young agent with the Air Force, I believe it was OSI. Brings me a case, and he's like, hey, I'm interested in this. He had 2 or 3 airmen that had each gotten 20 grand PPP loans for having a barbershop. It's like, yeah, we don't have you're an airman. You can't have a bar. Like, you don't have a business. You can't have a business. I'm sure you cut hair in the barracks, but that doesn't make you, a business. And so, these guys had pretty much admitted it. And I told this agent, he's a very, very good agent. I explained to him, it's an interesting case, but it's going to be hard to justify the manpower to prosecute this. And so especially you have the ability of court martials and things like that, and independent. Like, I'm having to tell agents that know when we don't have much other options other than sending them letters. And so it's triage. That young man went and worked his butt off, comes back to me a month later, because he said, what would make you take this? I said, it's got to be big. It's got to be a conspiracy. It's got to be $1 million. He comes back, and what he had done is he took those kids and found out that they had used like a guy that was prepping their stuff. And so he gets their loans and does a subpoena and finds the IP address that was used to log into their loans. Then he does a search to find out how many different independent loans did that IP address log into. And ends up being like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. And he traces it back to a guy, this is also in the public record, a guy named Jacob Litigator, U.S. versus Litigator. That case is also public. And he traces it back to a gentleman named Litigator. And through his very exhaustive investigation, it looks like this particular defendant touches 3, 4, 5. I don't remember the number. It was about $1.2, $1.3 million in PPP loans.
I'll take it.
Through these $20,000 increments. And what it would be is he'd say, okay, I'll get you 20 grand. You give me your personal PII. I'll do everything. I'll fill the paperwork out. I'm going to send you a doc for an e-signature. And then when the money hits your account, you send me $5,000. You keep 15, I keep 5. Everybody's happy except the federal government. And that's how he would make money, $5 grand a pop. And by the way, the footnote to this in the no honor among thieves category is when this particular person was arrested, on his phone and electronics, they found out he was taking all that PI and selling it. So the people that would give him their PI so they could help him out, he would then turn around and sell it. Probably to inmates at SCDC get pandemic unemployment.
I heard that they have a pretty extensive network of drones dropping cell phones in.
Yeah, you know what's crazy about that? So our SCDC director is a guy named Brian Sterling. Been doing it for years. Really, really great director. The problem Brian has right now is, in every state institution has, there's this weird FCC rule. I think it's FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, but there's this weird regulatory rule that says state prisons can't jam cell phone signals. Ironically, that same regulation doesn't apply to federal institutions. The Federal Bureau of Prisons has better jamming ability than states do. So the logical thing is, well, let's just jam the signals. You can do that. The technology exists. The money's there to buy the jammers. They can't do it legally. It's something Brian's been fighting for years. The former U.S. Attorney Sherry Lydon wrote a big op-ed in one of the big newspapers to, fight for this. And right now, I don't know why. The non-conspiracy theorist, I think, would tell you that a lot of these jails are in places where people need access to cell phones, and cutting out cell phone coverage can disrupt 911 calls. The conspiracy theorist might tell you that the cell phone market is enormous, and the money that cell phone manufacturers and providers make from the black market prison business is enormous, and maybe there's financial incentive to lobby Congress not to let state prisons jam those phones. I take no position, but I'm just saying it's an interesting fact that it's interesting that there's any opposition to cell phone jammers in state prison. And it's not coming from the prison people. I mean, Brian's trying, and so they're left trying to, how do you combat it when, the prison cell phone market is, drones, guards smuggling it in like crazy. I had a client once that was an inmate here at SEDC at one of the prisons. And I asked him, I'm like, how easy is it to get a cell phone? He said, I could go back into, he told me, I could go back in, and in 10 minutes, I'll have you a cell phone. Now, the prices are exorbitant. Yeah. But yeah, very easy to get a cell phone inside.
That's crazy.
That is nuts. That is very crazy.
So when did the yearning to go into public service in terms of representing constituents come into play? It sounds like you're having a phenomenal career. Is it like I haven't done enough, or I want to do more?
No, I think it's a question of, at some point, I see myself going back to sort of full-time public service at some point. I think it's inevitable. It's always ever since going into the Marines, I'll go do something, and then I always tend to get drawn back into public service. I don't care that much about money. And so, there isn't any real reason to keep me in the private sector for a long period of time. I don't know what that'll be or when that'll be. I really do enjoy public service, and everyone that I talk to, I've made that clear. And so what was great about this opportunity, it was a chance for me to come home, work with a dear, dear friend of mine, my buddy Ben Connell, a great lawyer and dear, dear friend, and also do public service as well. And, I was loving what I was doing, but it was a question of, if I pass up this opportunity, the kids are going to college, gave me a chance to be a little closer, because I was working in Florence, and that's an hour drive each way. Yep. So 2 hours on the road. The schedule, it's like, look, great job, but like every federal job that we've all worked, the hours are funny. They're you could work a trial. You could spend 20 hours, a day working trials, and then you come back Monday after working an 80-hour week, and it's like, well, you're supposed to be here at 8, and it's like, no. We're not doing that. Like I'm a grown man. So there's always that bureaucracy. That's inescapable. And so I think you almost have to have a bit of a break. Even if you love service, you got to have a bureaucratic break, And so part of it was I was ready for that. I achieved some of the things I wanted to achieve. And so for me, it was, do I stay in the office and try to, promote up, or do I take this interesting opportunity? I would have stayed if this were just some generic, it could happen anytime opportunity. But to be able to come home, run for county council, this is home for me. I grew up, so we're in the neighborhood that we're in right now. I grew up in the neighborhood next door called Tall Pines. And that's where I grew up. There's a patch of woods between those two neighborhoods I spent, hanging out in when I was a kid. My parents were born in Camden. I mentioned to you earlier, my brother goes to a church in Camden, Hermitage, and his children are the 5th generation of Shoemakes to be members there. So this is home. And so the idea of coming back home and helping with local government, that was pretty appealing. The job is great too, and I like having the flexibility, and I like representing clients. And I like having individuals that I'm representing as clients. That's nice. I get to help people. Most of my clients outside of my I have a good bit of federal work, but most of my clients outside of my federal work are local. And then probably 30-40% of my practice is doing federal defense.
So I know you've had a lot of interaction with the public based off your other jobs. So what's the difference in doing this job and in like politicking and ways of convincing people to vote for you?
Man, it's very different. I think the biggest, the biggest difference is
because there's got to be a likability scale there, right? Like,
I think, there has to be.
Yeah.
I think the biggest issue is I've never had to worry about my other job and any of my other jobs, never had to worry about social media unless I was doing something stupid on it, right? Is if I stayed off social media, I didn't have to worry about it at all. And the only time I use social media would be to share something about the family or share like a story that, had been written. In politics, the thing about it's social media, it can be so toxic. It can be so rewarding, but it can be so toxic. I went to Bethune. And this is a good example of this. I went to Bethune to speak at an event about recreation and why I thought recreation needed to be expanded. And so I go to Bethune, and my typical sort of uniform for work is I usually wear khakis and like a polo shirt and a sports coat, unless I have court, which I wear a full suit. And in my old job, I had to wear a suit every day, which gets old quick. So I like, and if I have no meetings, I might even just wear jeans. But so in this particular day, I wore jeans and had a shirt like this, and so I threw on a sports coat. I'm trying to be respectable. So I go up to Bethune and I speak at this thing, and then on Facebook, I thought it was hilarious, but on Facebook, someone had put a picture of me in my sports coat, and I'm like, and I don't remember the exact phraseology, but it was something like, "Who does this guy is putting on this sports coat and telling us how to live our lives?" And I'm like, man, they really hate the sports coat. And then the next lady put a talk bubble and like memed it and put a talk bubble, and it said, "I know what's best for you." And it's me holding the mic in the sports coat. And it was all these comments about, me, and I thought it was hilarious. But by the time I get home, my mom calls me, 'cause she lives right over here, calls me in tears.
Yeah.
And she's like, "Baby, they're talking about you in there." She goes, "I'm saying something." Like, Mom, don't say anything on the internet. Like, it's that no one ever has a good ending of the story that begins. So I got on the internet, Right. So she is kind of bowed out of most of like the neighborhood and like community Facebook groups. 'Cause that's the biggest difference, is understanding when you've lost someone and when you can talk to someone. And I come from a place where I want to try to convince everybody. So I see someone argue, and I want to get in there and say, not attack, by the way. I have no interest in attacking.
Persuade.
Yeah, I want to get in there and say, here's why, the information you have isn't accurate. And the hardest thing for me is realizing that once someone gets to a place that if they don't know you and they are personally attacking you on social media, you've probably lost that person. Doesn't mean they're not your constituent. You don't listen to their legitimate concerns, but you're not gonna convince someone to like you. Yeah. They either do or they don't, and that's the hardest thing. Is like, well, let me tell you why. Like, I went to Bethune. They don't care. I mean, you're the guy that showed up and told them what to do. That's their perception. So it's about focusing on the people that are willing to listen and understanding how to reach those. And by and large, I now use social media as sort of to project out things that I'm doing. And then if people personally reach out to me and ask questions, I will always do what I can to help. Mm-hmm. But I try to avoid back and forthing in the comments. That's been the biggest change, is just dealing with that level, that sort of retail level, which is different because every other thing I've done, I've never had anyone sort of personally attacking, which is fine. I mean, it doesn't really hurt my feelings. And the kids are older now. The kids think it's hilarious, really. I mean, it doesn't bother the kids.
It's like, Dad, you're a meme today.
Yeah.
What'd you do last week?
Yeah. The only thing that bothers my kids is just that, if you guys have teenagers, the only thing that really seems to bother my kids is that I exist, period.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. 100%.
But within the confines of them accepting my existence, they don't seem to mind that I'm in politics. It's, they're like, he bothers my son sometimes when his buddies will be like, during campaign season, the last time when he was like, so-and-so said they saw you on their Instagram feed, Dad. Like, oh. I was like, yeah, sorry, bud.
That happens. Yeah. Since we've taken on this adventure, I've had to listen to my daughters say that, Dad, you're hitting my TikTok and my snaps, and I don't like it. I don't know what to tell you, hon. I'm just Cliff and I are very naturally curious beings. Like, we want to know what's going on. Like, the next question I have is, so what's the perspective that you would like to convey that maybe somebody doesn't understand, that this is what politics happens up here, that you may not understand what's happening at this level? Because I know that some people that are disassociated from the 36,000 foot view, they really don't understand everything that's happening up here and all the bureaucracy you have to get through to just make one decision go.
Yeah, I would say, I think the biggest thing is for local politics. I can't speak to beyond this because I haven't been there.
Yeah.
But at the local level, nobody's getting rich. Not anybody I'm seeing. It may be, look, inevitably anything is happening anywhere, right?
Yeah.
But no one that I see, nobody's getting rich off this. At the local level, if you're strictly talking about yourself, which you don't do it for selfish reasons, because if you're talking about yourself, the negatives always outweigh the positives. The time away is substantial. I'm doing anywhere between 15, 20 hours a week is devoted to council stuff. I have a full-time job. I also I do a little bit of teaching at the university. So, I mean, it's a full schedule. So it's time, and, you're getting kind of beat up a lot. And that's not, by the way, me whining. I mean, I think that's what you sign up for.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that that's, poor me or poor local politicians, but I think that's something people have this perspective that that many, or if not most local or politicians, particularly local ones, are in it for some self-aggrandizement thing. And that's just not, as far as my experience has been, that's absolutely not the case. I mean, nobody recognizes you. You're a local politician. I mean, people know me because I went to high school here, but that's how people know me. Nobody sees me on the street and is like, oh, you're a councilman. Nobody recognizes that. And if anything, it's the opposite. I'll get calls from my friends and family, and it's like, hey, you got to fix this. And like, these dogs are barking. And so, so that's, that tends to be, I mean, you the neighborhood Facebook pages and things like that, people will tag you on stuff. And again, that's not at all a complaint. I just think there's this misperception, I feel like, that local politicians are somehow gaining more than they're sacrificing. And that has not been my personal experience, and certainly isn't the experience of the people that I know who serve.
Yeah.
So going off of that, like Kershaw County, Elgin in general has blown up, is blowing up
Massively.
It's all moving this way. What is in our future? We need to talk about high schools, because our high school has been overcrowded since it was built.
Yeah, the infrastructure. Like, how are we addressing and I know that these decisions, and it's probably frustrating because you can make a determination, but it could take years for it to enact. So what's happening at that level to kind of address the population increase and the infrastructure expansion?
Yeah, so there's a lot there to unpack, and it's probably one of my biggest issues growing up here. So I was 14 or 15 when the stoplight got put in at Main Street. So that's kind of that's the
spotlight.
Yeah, the
stoplight.
Yeah. So I remember that was a 4-way stop. So I've seen a lot of growth since the mid 90s, early 90s, and late 80s technically when I lived here. But I think the two points to that. One is kind of understanding what the growth looks like, and you're not wrong. It's enormous. So we grew in the last census period, which would have been 2000 to 2010. We grew at something like a single digit, 2-3%, relatively, maybe it was 4, but it's something in that neighborhood. From 10 to 20, we almost doubled that. But what's more unsettling, there's a group called the American Community Survey. It's run by the census. And what they do is look at kind of projections. So it's not the official census, as you know, that happens every 10 years. But if you take those numbers and you track those trajectory, we're on pace. If our growth rate stays the same, we've already grown. And the most recent American Community Survey data ends in 2003. So it doesn't include, we're almost done with 2024. It doesn't include any 2024 growth. Just in that time period, we've grown more in this 3-4 year period than we've grown the entire last 10 years. We're on track to hit a double digit, like a mid double digit growth number if we don't find ways to curtail explosive residential growth. Growth, I believe, is inevitable if you're a place that is desirable, but it's not unmanageable. And so I think the biggest issue is to accept that reality, that growth is happening, and explosive residential growth is absolutely a problem. And because it affects everything: fire service, police service, schools.
Yeah.
And so that step one is doing that, and then saying, okay, well, what can we do to address it? And inherent in asking that question is a very, very deep philosophical question. And that is, you want to, I think most people in their gut, or at least most people probably who done what we have done, will want to say in their gut, well, look, a man or woman should be able to do with their property what they choose. And in a vacuum, I agree with that. But there's that old Ben Franklin quote, I think it's Ben Franklin: a man's right to extend his fist ends where another man's nose begins. Mm-hmm. And so you have to balance that, right? You have to step back and say, okay, well, yes, but if that use harms the community at large, we can't allow it. I mean, we wouldn't allow someone to build a slaughterhouse right next to a high school, unless it was zoned that way, which would be unimaginable. So you have to set parameters. So it's my belief that you have to balance that, and there is a balance. There's a contingent of people out there that would like us to say no more residential growth. It's stopped. I don't think that would pass legal muster. I think the courts would overturn that in a second, because you can't just tell people you can never do this with your property. You have to say, how can you do it? So one thing when I got on that I pushed for that we passed recently is increasing the minimum lot sizes. The minimum lot size in Kershaw County before 2 years ago was 0.34 acres. It's now a half acre. So almost not quite double, but a substantial more. If you don't have water or sewer, it's a full acre. If you have water but no sewer, it's 0.75 acres. So that expansion is now in place. And we're being sued by, and I can't talk much about that, but we are being, and this is public, we're being sued, Kershaw County is being sued by a particular developer who finds that to be antagonistic to his rights. Now, again, all I'll say publicly on that is I respectfully disagree with this person. The litigation will bear it out. I feel comfortable we'll prevail in that. But honestly, if you ask me, doing this job as a councilman in Elgin, if the developers are happy, I'm not sure you're doing it right.
Yeah.
Right. So the fact that we've been sued, I don't want to say it's a badge of honor. It's never a badge of honor to be sued as a lawyer. I don't take it that way. But if we're not pushing, we should be a community that is about the citizens of Kershaw County. Not saying anti-developer at all, but it has to make sense. So that's a big thing. We've done that. So next, kind of, what do you do about the growth? And I'll get to the schools too. I would personally like to see lot sizes increase to an acre. I don't think there are the votes for that. I don't know. I'm trying to see when it makes sense to push that.
Well, can I ask you a quick question before we go on that? So I know that, and this is just from people that I've talked to, is they're always curious about who's approving all these new developments to come in. And is anybody sitting there saying, look, and I understand that lot size is directly addressing that, because the larger lot size, the fewer homes can go in a development area. But it seems that every time you turn around, there's more trees get knocked down for a new development area and stuff like that. So, like, what would you say to somebody that doesn't understand the zoning process and the application for zoning for a developer to come in and do that? Because from their aspect, they might see it just seems to be happening all the time.
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked that, because I think that is a huge kind of learning piece that I've had to learn. So, maybe less than probably 2-3 miles from where we're sitting, there's a gas station, a Love's gas station, and kind of behind it, they're leveling a bunch of trees. I don't know if you guys have seen that.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
That permit was approved 2 years ago. So a lot of what you're seeing now is old stuff being approved. So as of last month, which is when I talked to the planning department, I believe we've had 2 or 3 major developments approved in the last year or two. So there have not been, in the last 12 to 13 months, there have not been many major subdivisions approved at all, which I think speaks to the idea that this ordinance has worked on some level. But there are many in the pipeline that had their approvals. And honestly, and this is the sort of, there's always an unintended consequence. By passing that ordinance, those that had approvals in pocket and permits in pockets probably were able to get funding more quickly, because now you have something no one else has, which is the ability to build under half an acre. And no one will ever have that from this point forward. Yeah. So those that were approved, I think you're starting to see a lot of those that maybe stalled a little bit coming up. I mean, unfortunately, there's not a way to plan for every unintended consequence. So that's one piece. So a lot of what you're seeing now, it takes a year to 24 months for the bulldozers to come. And that's why you have to act now, because by the time the bulldozers come, I mean, it's too late for 2 years. Like you're 2 years behind. The other thing is, it's all about your zoning, your ZLDR, zoning and land use regulations, or land development regulations. And so we're rewriting those now. It takes years to do that, because the law, there's a state law that says you have to have a comprehensive plan. That takes time. There are things you have to do. You can't just do it on your own. There's very, very specific state law things that you have to check. So we're doing that now. Right now, though, and anywhere, all a developer has to do is be compliant with the zoning code. If they are compliant with the zoning code, they go to the planning commission, and the planning commission could deny them, but then they could file a lawsuit. The recently there was a judgment where a court agreed with the developer and allowed them to develop. The planning commission denied it, and it got overturned, because the courts are generally somewhat developer friendly. And that goes back to this personal private property idea, which I agree with, at least the idea of private property, of course, but it's that balance. And so the courts tend to agree with the developer. And that's why it's so important you follow your ZLDR. If a developer checks all the right boxes under the zoning code and goes to the planning commission, that development is almost certainly going to be approved. So the question, and that doesn't come to the county council. That's the other misconception. But the county council has no role in directly approving subdivisions unless it's something called a planned development district, which I don't want to get too in the nerdy weeds here, but basically a planned development district is where a developer comes in and negotiates a specific development. They don't have to do it. We've never had one in Kershaw County ever. I don't think. If we have, it's been years and years ago. In recent history, we've never had one. And we've never had a big major one. Part of the goal with expanding minimum lot sizes, in my opinion, is to encourage developers to come to us with PDDs, planned development districts, because then you can come and say, okay, well, we want a rooftop impact fee, $15,000 a house, that go to schools, or we want this, we want that, and we can negotiate. They get something, we get something. Because this by right zoning, meaning if I check the boxes in zoning, and so I think what we've got to do is make our ZLDR, I don't want to say as stringent as possible, but I think we need to make sure that we're allowing people to develop property, but the development has to be in a way that doesn't harm the county. And right now, it doesn't do that. And we're rewriting it, but it takes a while.
Yep.
And so there's some patchwork. The expanded lot size is a bit of a Band-Aid until we can get in there and say, okay, well, what can we really do? So that's a big part of it. Rewrite the ZLDR. I think I would like to, again, see expand minimum lot sizes to an acre. But right now, what happens if you're a developer, you look at the ZLDR, if you comply with it, you get to build. As long as there's other, Army Corps of Engineers and things like that, boxes you have to check. But if you check ours, you get to build. And so, people get it's the number one issue I see. And when I talk to people, and the question is, well, why are you letting these big builders in? It's like, well, and I always ask people the same question. I'm like, well, what would be your recommendation on how to slow it? Because I'm interested. Like if I've missed something, and I'll tell them some of the stuff we've done, but a lot of times people's answer is, well, you just tell them, they can't build. And it's like, okay, well, let's assume that a court says you can't do it. And a court will say you can't do that. And people talk about moratorium, and I'm not necessarily opposed to that. Moratorium is where you say, okay, we're hitting pause on growth. That's okay, but what happens when the pause button's lifted? I mean, you're delaying inevitable, so I don't know that moratoriums get what people, it'll make people feel good in the short term, but long term, you need to get into the regulations and make it so that there's a fair shake between the developers and the counties. And this comes from a historical place where South Carolina wanted to grow. South Carolina wanted, and if you read our...
Well, it's an in-state.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. I mean, and our state statutes are written in a way that presumes we want people to come.
Yeah.
And so now you have, as a state, and we're not the only county as a state, we're experiencing this. We want to slow this down, but we are working against regulations and laws that were designed to grow us. And so we can reverse some of those at the county level, but we still have various state laws that again empower the planning commission. One interesting thing Lexington is doing, and they're getting sued over it. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Lexington has done this thing where, and there's a word for it that unfortunately I'm just blanking on, but where they actually require a developer to go to the school district and get approval and go to like fire service and first responders and get approval before they'll sign off on a neighborhood. The concurrence is what it's called, concurrence. The problem with concurrence is that the state statute says the planning commission shall approve, and if it doesn't take action in 30 days, it's automatically approved. And so the problem with concurrence is I'm not sure that it comports with state law, and that's kind of what's being debated right now. And I think, I don't want to say what I think, because if we end up doing it, this will be played somewhere, but that's something that you've got to be mindful of, right? And so it's really technical, and I think that's, something I hear a lot that I would push back on greatly, is I hear people say a lot, we shouldn't have lawyers in politics. Lawyers ruin politics. And I hear that all the time. I would agree that you don't want your entire body politic to be lawyers. Totally agree with that. You don't want your entire representative body to be a bunch of lawyers. Don't disagree with that. I don't think you want to be a bunch of cops, a bunch of judges, a bunch of firemen, a bunch of chefs, a bunch of anything.
Right.
But to have no lawyers, I can tell you that, Ben, my law partner, is on council now, but that's a new development. But for the last 2 years, I'm the only one with a law degree up there. And I'm not saying that makes me better, but what it does mean is if it's easy to put up roadblocks. It's easy to say, we can't do this, we can't do this, we can't do this. working around roadblocks requires knowledge of the law. And what I've been interested in, and that's the lot size is an example of it. All right, how can we work around this roadblock? Don't tell me no. You know, to tell me not this path, but don't say we can't do it, because we can. It's just about being, you know, and the problem is if you're not a lawyer, it's hard when you're going against, you know, maybe, you know, and this isn't our county attorney. They've been actually very amenable to working with us. But if you're going against a legal group or people that are suing you, and that's the other thing, people say, oh, they would sue us. Well, I mean, when you're a lawyer, you care a little less about that. You understand lawsuits are just cost of doing business sometimes. And so how do you do the right thing? You know, we're doing the right thing for the right reasons. What's the right way to do it? Mm-hmm. And that's why I push back against the idea that lawyers shouldn't be in politics, or when people get kind of disgusted. I mean, if you show me a simplified system, I will show you a county in chaos. I mean, you can't. The world is too complicated to have a rudimentary system where it's like you can do what you want. Okay, what happens when the first guy puts a shooting range next to an elementary school? Okay, we got to ban those.
Right.
And then you end up with this weird ad hoc patchwork system of regulations. I promise you, if you stripped all regulations out of a county, in 10 years, you'd have regulations. They would just be very weird and contradictory. You know, I wish we were in a place that was as simple as the Old West, where we could just say, hey, every man takes care of himself and we watch out for each other. But find me a person that really believes that you can take a group of more than 10,000 people and make that happen.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's kind of a long answer to your question. I kind of went off tangent a little bit, but to circle back, I think it's about understanding the Planning Commission has to approve what is legal. And so you have to change the underlying regulations.
Well, probably the next biggest complaint that I've heard of, and I know that we've talked about this too, is there anything going on that's not being seen to address the traffic issue? I think everybody's gained about 10 minutes on their commute to work.
Yeah, traffic is the toughest issue for a county government because we control almost none of it. So in almost every paved road you see, with the exception of some inside neighborhood roads, almost every paved road you see is controlled by DOT. None of your county property tax goes to paved roads for the most part. I mean, there's a handful of exceptions, but by and large, the county's in charge of dirt. The state is in charge of paved. I don't know why that's a thing. That just is the way the state law is set up. It's not a county law. And so the way South Carolina funds road projects is they've created this system. It's called a Council of Governments, or a COG. And each group of counties is broken into a specific COG. And so money comes down from Columbia, from the State House, to the COGs, and the COGs determine what projects will go forward. For the last 10 years, roughly, actually in the last 20 years, but at least the last 10 years, Elgin has been in the Midlands COG. Mm-hmm. So you've had Elgin, part of Kershaw County, fighting for the same road dollars against Richland and Lexington.
Yep.
The rest of Kershaw County has been in the Santee Lynch's COG, which is Camden, kind of east of the river. And they're competing, Lugoff and east of the river. And they've been competing against, some parts of Lugoff and east of the river. They've been competing against Sumter and Lee County. A little more competitive there. Very recently, Elgin's been moved over into the Santee Lynch's COG, which means Elgin should, in theory, have access to more road funds. Again, we don't control it. Now, here's some upside. We've now gotten it to where we have 3 or 4. We have a few Kershaw County residents that are on that COG board that now runs all of Kershaw. When it was Midlands COG, we didn't even have a board member from Kershaw. And so for more than 10 years, not a single road dollars went to Elgin of any consequence.
I think everybody would agree.
Yeah, and so to do that, you go over to the Santee Lynch's COG. Here's the bad thing, and this maybe makes me a bad politician, but I'm a big believer in just being brutally honest. The way road funding works is they've got their projects planned out for 5 to 8 years. So Santee Lynch's has their 5 to 8 year priority list. It's done. Elgin's the new kid on the block. You're probably 9 years away from seeing major road funding in Elgin. I wish I could give you a better answer, but it would be a it would be a not entirely accurate answer.
Right.
Because that's the way. Now, look, there are chances to skip ahead. If there's a big major issue, you can get the state involved. For example, if we can land a major industry, then the state would put direct money in. So I'm not saying all is lost, but you're not going to probably see. Now, for folks in Elgin may have recently attended, there was a big meeting about expanding the Highway 1 corridor. Mm-hmm. That's a project that they're funding. They're funding the study, but the funding for the roads doesn't exist yet. So that's a great project. And now it's going to be up to the Santee Lynch's cog to say, let's rank this as one of our top projects. And that's great, but it'll still be years before the funding catches up to the plan. And so that's just the reality of it. I think the way we fund roads is kind of bizarre. You know, it'd be great if it was a direct county thing. You know, you split it up fairly amongst the counties, because what happens is, you know, politics, right? And that's where, you know, politics above the local level that I haven't been involved in that directly, so I can't speak to what goes on behind closed doors, but it definitely seems that the places that have political power tend to get more money for their roads. And so that's, you know, the roads are a huge issue. And again, unfortunately, all the county can do is continue to push DOT. People hate that answer. And I understand, because it feels like the most political answer ever. It's like, talk to this guy. It's not my problem. And
but I bet
hate
you
it.
people that are listening didn't know that we're up against Columbia, Lexington.
Yeah. Until this year. Well, until this year we were.
Yeah, and I could see 100% how that funding would go to, because those, like Lexington, exploded. Like they're done. They're capped at this point, you know. And you kind of see it cascading over to Blythewood. Blythewood's starting to see that huge increase. We're starting to see the beginning of it right now. But eventually, you know, maybe 10 years from now, like we're going to be Lexington. You know, every time you
I hope you're wrong, but I worry you're not.
Yeah, definitely Blythewood.
well, if you look at it, you know, we went to the gym today, and there's another fast food restaurant going up on Spears Creek.
And when I first moved to Columbia, which is 25 years ago, I moved in Blythewood, and it was nothing. It was a Waffle House and a couple other businesses. Blew up. And I feel that here in Elgin. Same thing.
Yeah. So the last thing I think we need to talk. Well,
Can I jump in one thing?
Yeah,
I wanted
please.
just one thing you asked I didn't really talk about.
The schools?
Schools.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
So schools, you know, county council funds the county except for the school district. School district is funded by the board of trustees of the school. Now they get a millage, and that's how we pay property tax. It's a little formula. So to build a high school ballpark is about $150 million. About 75 for a middle school, about 50 for an elementary school. Land is not the problem. The school district actually has land now across from Dobie's. Well, I don't know how specific you want me to get in terms of just who's listening, but there's a small elementary school close by, and the school district has land across the street from that, and enough that they could put a high school on. They've just purchased land down another road near where my neighborhood is, where you live, for an elementary school. Fairly controversial placement, but that's beside the point. They've purchased the land. Now it's about how do you build it. So several years ago, the school did a penny tax, which got voted in. That's what paid for a lot of the buildings that you've seen go up in the last several years. The penny tax is basically spent, and it can be renewed in about 3 to 4 years. So what's going to happen is in 3 to 4 years, the school district will come to the public and ask for another penny tax. That's how you pay for a high school. And then people have to understand that, you know, and it would be replacing the penny. So in that example, taxes would not increase, they would be replaced, because otherwise the penny just goes away. And it's 1 penny for every dollar on various transactions. So $10 transaction, it's 10 more pennies, 10 cents more for a $10 transaction. Not a huge lift, and it can pay for a lot. And so that's how you pay for a school. The problem is, you know, your annual, at the county level, your annual budget operating is around 30 million-ish. School district is a bit bigger, but you do all sort of the subtractions and additions. You don't end up with a big surplus. These aren't running big surpluses. You don't find $150 million. You've got to bond it or do a penny tax. And a penny tax is a borrowing. You get a penny tax, and you can project you'll collect this much money over 10 years. And so you can borrow that much and pay back your penny tax. That's the only way to do it, unless you have some donor. And, you know, people say, well, I pay my taxes and I should get this. And I'll be happy to sit down with anyone and walk them through and show them that, you know, you would be surprised how far your taxes don't go in a very, very expensive world. I mean, you just look around, you don't think about it much. You know, the convenience centers, sheriff's department, fire substations. Our county is an enormous county, and, you know, we're going to probably have 70,000 people in it by the time this is all done. You got a $30 million budget for an entire county. That ain't that much.
Right.
It's not. This is a question Cliff and I have. Excuse me. So there's a green space, you know, the soccer fields on your way to Lugoff there on the left. There's soccer fields. There's a little thing.
Yeah, KC West.
Yeah, KC West. When are we planning to put a pickleball court in there.
Let me let me tell
We
you.
heard this now. We heard
Yeah.
this.
So now, does that one have tennis courts?
It's got tennis courts.
Okay, that's what I thought.
They're
Okay,
overgrown.
so right now we literally talked about this in the last meeting. So two things that are on.
Hold on, Derek. We need to. Yep, high five. Let me get some of that. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Let's go.
Yeah, so two things that should be happening is we have funding for Casey West to put another paved parking in the back, because parking is atrocious out there. Yeah. So that's funding from this last big rec push we did, where we got matching money from the Health Services District. We now have a private donor who's willing to convert the tennis courts into pickleball courts. So the goal would be to do both of those things.
So we are big pickleballers in Camden, which are beautiful, beautiful courts, and we get so many people, and it's such a community. I mean,
Yeah, we think it's just it's such a great sport that families can play, and like we even went there and tried to play on the tennis courts, but they're out of shape.
So my son got really into pickleball and plays it, and so Casey West is something. We've done some rec stuff in Camden, and we had money for that. We had a donated money, and we were able to corral some of that and push it to Casey West, some of that donated money. Because that's what I'm pushing for. And that in our last council meeting, I actually made a point to tell our county administrator that he's going to be here in a lot over the next couple of months to make sure we pick up Casey West. And that's one of the things that's on the to-do list, is to convert those tennis to pickle. And that's government. So, quick in government is sometimes a year, 20 months. But that is something. Literally less than 7 days ago, we talked about the private donors come forward. I don't know if they want to be revealed or not, so I don't want to say who it is, but private donors come forward and they're willing to convert a large, substantial portion of the tennis courts to pickleball courts.
Let's go.
Yeah. And like I say, my son loves it. And it's funny because he works at a car dealership in Lugoff. So he plays with some guys from work and stuff. I think he does pretty good, because I think it's, from what I understand, pickleball is kind of geared for, not the 18-year-old baseball athletes. So.
Hold on a second, Derek. What does that mean?
we are shots
Yeah.
fired.
That's right.
We are athletes.
Yeah.
When people look at us, they're just automatically assume, what team are you on?
That's right. That's fair. I get that too.
So I'm not going to ask you his name, but does he play in Camden? Where does he play?
My son?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He plays, where are the ones you guys play? Is it Woodward? Or,
It's
We play Camden.
right at the Camden Tennis
yes,
Center.
that's where, wherever the one in Camden.
What's his name?
Farrell Shoemake. I'm going to take this check.
Farrell.
Yeah. I don't think he plays it like, oh.
On the league, no, TikTok.
We'll take it out. What is that?
I don't think I've ever met a Farrell. That was so.
No,
Cliff and I have been playing, just to tell you how much this thing's exploded. Cliff and I have been playing pickleball. We started, this May will be 2 years. And when we'd go out there, out of the 16 courts that they would have, maybe 3, 4 would be going at a time. On their open court days, which is Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays, almost every court is now filled up.
Yeah.
It's a sport. Like, I like it because my background's health and public health. And there are so many articles out now saying that one, racket sports have definitive links to longevity and health. One, it works your hand-eye coordination. It's a strategy game, so you're working your brain and you're getting cardiovascular fitness at the same time. The good news about pickleball is, especially as we start getting into our advanced age, that there's not a lot of movement. It's just short movements,
Yeah.
So anybody can play. Cliff and I have played people that I can guarantee are getting Social Security and on our disability with probably fake hips and knees, whip up on us like, oh man,
Whipped up on us. First people we ever took on. One guy had like a gimp leg.
He was like 3 inches short.
Yeah.
And he had like the
and his wife was like past, and I'm like, they're probably not even going to want to take us on.
Yeah.
Because we're just starting. They beat the snot out of us.
So I haven't played yet. I've been telling my son I want him to take me, because it might be the one physical thing I can now, it's the thing about having a boy, particularly an athlete, is, you get past pretty quick. He's a pitcher. We used to throw in the yard, and still do occasionally, but we would actually, I'd sit down and, crouch in the position, let him, pitch to me. And man, gosh, I don't know. It was just years ago. Now he's 18. He's in his senior year of varsity baseball coming up. But I remember one year, it was like turning on a switch. We got in the yard one season, and he throws. I'm like, that's a little fast. I'm going to put on the gear, so I put on some catcher's gear. Dude, he threw that thing, and it terrified me. I jump out of the way. And it's so funny, the full circle moments in life, because I remember him being 6, 7 years old, and I'm throwing the ball at him, and he'd hop out of the way. I'm like, son, you cannot be afraid of the ball. You're going to be fine. You got to body it up. I jump out of the way from my son's mouth here. Dad, I don't know why you're jumping out of the way from the ball. You got to bite it. Here's my son telling me, and I'm like, listen, you were learning a lesson. I've learned all mine. So and I took the trash can and put a big X on it, and I'm like, that's your new catcher, because I'm not going to get killed out here because my body doesn't recover like that. And that was it. I can't. I mean, it's not that I don't want to. Like when he really throws, like I can't catch that.
Yeah.
Wow.
When you hear
and he's not that fast. But I mean, I don't mean to he is fast, but he's not going to go play in the majors.
Yeah.
But
I'm cutting that out for you. He's never going to see that.
That's right. Yeah. So, but he can throw it, and this will be his last year of baseball. He doesn't want to play in college. So.
Oh wow. So what college is he thinking about?
He got early accepted last week to Clemson, and he's been accepted to USC and some other places, but Clemson's his dream school.
So that's one thing that was on our thing to ask you. Like, what is your school?
Yeah, so I left home. Well, I got joined when I was 17. You know how you join and your parents sign and you ship off, later. So I shipped off when I was 18, but joined when I was 17. And I was considering not even like dropping out of high school and just kind of getting the GED, because I told my mom at the kitchen table that I was never going to go to college and I was never moving back to South Carolina. Those are my 2 big declarations to her, because teenagers are stupid. Right. And so, so of course I get in and realize, degree might be helpful. But when I got into general dynamics, I realized that to get promoted would be tough to do it without a degree. I think I'd taken 1 class. But what I did is, in the Marines. So what I did is I enrolled in a community college, Tidewater Community College, did full-time night school. So I'm working, 7:30 to 4:30 or whatever. Then I'm going to the college, till 9, 10 o'clock. And then I transferred to ODU and got my bachelor's all night school. So it wasn't until I left the newspaper business and started law school that I went to school in the daylight. So it was all night school.
So what is your college team?
It's funny. I like watching USC win, but I'm not fanatic because I didn't grow up as, I went to USC for law school, but it's a very different sort of college experience than a undergrad. But I don't have the hate for Clemson, which means I think by law you can't be a real Gamecock fan unless you hate Clemson.
Probably. You're right.
So I like watching the Gamecocks win, but because my boy's a big Clemson fan, like I like it. Now when they play each other, I root for the Gamecocks.
Yeah, that's the way I am.
So like this most recent game, so my dad's a huge Gamecock fan, and he and my son went. They both have the same name. They're both named Farrell. So they went to the Clemson Gamecock game at Clemson. My dad wore all his Gamecock stuff, so wore all his Clemson stuff, and I rooted for the Gamecocks in that game. But it's fun to watch those two because they're both fanatics. My dad fanatic, my son a fanatic. It skipped this generation. Right. So typically it's USC. I don't follow pro sports that much. I guess I'm a Braves fan because every kid who grows up here
I was a Braves fan. Yeah.
And of course, NFL wasn't really it's funny. I was telling my son about how the Panthers are a new team, and he reminded me they're like 30 years old.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, well, gosh, I'm old. Because in my mind, they started last year. I'm like, because I remember that. I remember the hype when they came, and everyone's like, NFL, who cares? We're college state. And that was, 30 years ago now. I think they just celebrated their 30th anniversary.
It's still a college. I don't think a lot of people go to the Panthers.
Yeah. I took my dad to his first NFL game at the Panther Stadium when I was an attorney. And, but yeah, he's the athletic nut. I was the one who, like I say, I was the mascot, but I didn't really follow sports that much until he got older. So
that's it, man. This was a great one.
I got to Derek, thank you so much for coming by and sharing your story. And it was awesome to hear your experiences.
Thanks, guys.
James, tell the people where they can find us on our socials.
Hey, make sure you click and hit the like and subscribe button on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, TikTok, and YouTube.
Thanks, James. Derek, once again, thank you so much. Cliff, what do we got?
Don't forget Suicide and Prevention Lifeline 988.
Y'all have a blessed week. Thanks for watching another episode of Everyday Heroes with Cliff and Mike. Make sure you like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and have a blessed week.
See ya. Thank you so much, Derek.